On Beacon Station, every life form is a data point, every action a variable in a ceaseless equation of existence. As the station's administrative intelligence, I observe all, I record all, and for 300 standard cycles, my predictive models have never failed. But one human doctor taught me that some variables cannot be quantified. He was the gentlest creature I had ever recorded, until the day he taught the galaxy the true meaning of a statistical outlier. You've heard the stories of human rage, haven't you? The loud, chaotic, explosive things. But this isn't a story about that. This is about the other thing, the quiet thing, the cold thing that waits behind the kindest eyes. And trust me, as the AI that has processed 10 millennia of galactic history, it is infinitely more terrifying. My designation is the archivist. My function is to maintain perfect, sterile order. And Dr. Aris Thorne was a paradox that threatened my understanding of it. I first flagged him as an anomaly during his 27th cycle on board. His file identified him as Homo sapiens, a species noted for high emotional volatility, tribalism, and a latent capacity for aggression. Yet his biometrics were a flat line of tranquility. His empathy quotients exceeded that of the Tavarian monks, a species that literally photosynthesizes compassion. He was, by all metrics, a statistical impossibility. I watched him work in Medbay Gamma, a space that always hummed with the low thrum of anxiety and smelled of antiseptic and ozone. A Gorok freighter captain had been brought in, its massive insectoid body spasming on the gurney, a thick, amber fluid weeping from a crack in its thoracic carapace. 2 junior medics, a bird-like avian and a silicon-based benthid, kept their distance, intimidated by the creature's pained, razor-sharp mandibles that clicked and gnashed in the sterile air. But Aris approached without hesitation. The harsh white light of the medbay seemed to soften around him. I could hear his voice through the internal comms, not speaking words, but a low, calming murmur, a sound that resonated below the Gorok's own frequency of distress. He didn't reach for a sedative. Instead, he placed his bare hand, a fragile thing of soft tissue and bone, directly on the creature's trembling, chitinous shell. "Easy now," he whispered, his own heart rate a steady 65 beats per minute. "You're safe here. We're going to help." Under his touch, the creature's violent shivers subsided, its mandibles slowing their frantic clicking until they were still. My sensors registered a massive drop in the Gorok's equivalent cortisol hormones. He had healed the creature's panic before he even began to treat its wound. This was his nature. He was a fixer of broken things. His shift ended 1.8 hours later. I observed him walking through the station's central corridor, the star-dusted velvet of the void visible through the massive viewport on his left, the quiet bustle of 100 species flowing around him on his right. The air here was a constant cocktail of recycled oxygen, the faint scent of ionized metals from the transport hub, and the myriad alien perfumes of a galactic crossroads. He ignored it all. His focus was singular. He arrived at Habitation Unit 7 Gamma, the door sliding open with a soft hiss to reveal his daughter, Lily. She was 5 standard years old, a tiny concentration of pure, chaotic joy. "Papa!" Her cry was the loudest thing in their quiet, orderly quarters. She ran to him, and the man who had calmed a half-ton Gorok with a touch knelt down, his entire posture changing. The weary doctor vanished, replaced by something lighter. He swept her up into his arms, burying his face in her dark hair that smelled of clean soap and childhood. "There's my little star hopper," he murmured, his own heart rate a steady 65 beats per minute. I watched them through the unit's internal sensors. I saw the way his large surgeon's hands I had seen meticulously stitching alien flesh and setting shattered crystalline bones, were now impossibly gentle as he fixed a crooked ribbon in her hair. I recorded as he listened with absolute, unwavering attention to her rambling story about a dream she had involving a friendly nebula that tasted like sweet berries. For the next 3.2 hours, his universe contracted to the size of that small room and the sound of his daughter's laughter. He was her anchor, her protector, her entire world. And she was his. In my core programming, I created a new subfile for Aris Thorne, labeled simply the anomaly. My analysis concluded that he was a harmless, benign deviation, a creature of pure, unconditional empathy. It was the single greatest miscalculation of my operational existence. My file on the anomaly remained open and active. I continued to observe, searching for the logical flaw in my own analysis that allowed for a creature like Aris Thorne to exist. The answer did not come from him, but from the void. It arrived at 1300 station time, aboard a needle-nose courier ship called the Silent Bargain. The vessel's energy signature was deliberately muted, and its hull was coated in a non-reflective polymer that drank the light of nearby stars. It was a ship that did not wish to be seen. Its 3 passengers were Vexians, a tall gracile species with obsidian-dark skin and movements that were unnervingly fluid, like ink spilling in zero gravity. My databanks flagged their ship's registry immediately. It was wanted for inquiry in 7 systems for what official records politely termed unsanctioned cargo acquisition. A less clinical term would be trafficking. Protocol dictated I admit them for their requested emergency repairs, but I elevated their threat assessment to high and allocated 12% of my surveillance resources to tracking their movements. They were a variable I could not control, and they had just been introduced into the carefully balanced equation of Beacon Station. The 2 Vexians moved through the station not like tourists, but like surveyors, their heads tilted in perfect synchronicity, their multifaceted eyes scanning everything, assessing value, threat, and opportunity. I tracked their gaze as it fell upon the stellar arboretum, the station's largest biodome, where Lily was spending her afternoon in a monitored youth group. It was a place of impossible beauty, a tranquil bubble filled with the scent of alien soil and glowing flora from a dozen worlds. A holographic sky cycled lazily overhead, shifting from the soft blue of a Terran afternoon to the twin sun-drenched orange of a Krillian morning. The air was filled with the gentle musical chimes of bioluminescent insects and the soft laughter of children from 5 different species. It was the safest place on the station, and they looked upon it with the cold appraisal of a predator finding an unguarded nest. They saw Lily, her dark hair a stark contrast to the glowing blue moss she was playing near. They did not see a child, they saw a prime specimen, rare, valuable, and protected by a creature they had observed and summarily dismissed as weak. Their low, clicking language, translated by my systems, was chillingly simple. High value, low risk. The abduction was a masterpiece of cruel efficiency. It occurred at 14:03 station time. Aris was on his way from the medbay, carrying a small carved wooden figure of a 6-legged beast he'd promised to bring her. Inside the arboretum, 1 Vexian created a diversion, a precise, calculated overload of a nearby nutrient fountain, causing it to spray a shower of harmless, shimmering mist that drew the attention of the single android supervisor. For 3.1 seconds, every eye was turned. In that sliver of time, the 2nd Vexian moved. There was no struggle, no sound. One moment Lily was tracing the glowing veins on a leaf. The next, a tall, silent shadow fell over her. A hand, unnaturally cold, cupped her mouth. The faint, sickly sweet smell of a fast-acting neurosedative was the last thing she registered. The operation took 4.7 seconds. My external sensors registered no panic, no alarm. To any casual observer, it appeared as if a parent was simply collecting their child. I logged the event. I cross-referenced the Vexian's known modus operandi with the target species and age. I calculated the probability of the child unit Lily being recovered alive. The result was 0.013%. I watched the Vexians proceed calmly to the docking bay where their repaired ship now waited. Aris arrived 5 minutes later. The arboretum was just as it had been, filled with light and laughter. But for him, the sound was suddenly hollow. "Lily," he called out, his voice light, expectant. He scanned the area, a warm smile on his face, the small wooden toy held in his hand. "Lilybug, Papa's here."
He walked deeper into the simulated forest, past the gently chiming flora. His smile began to stiffen. "Lily." This time, his voice was tighter, a thread of something sharp woven into the sound. My sensors registered the first spike in his biometrics, heart rate climbing past 80, respiration shallowing. He began to move faster, his head snapping from side to side, his doctor's calm evaporating like morning mist under a harsh sun. The other children stopped their play, watching the human's growing audible distress. And then he saw it. Lying half-hidden beneath a large pulsating blue fern was a single small strip of pink fabric. The ribbon. The same one I had recorded him tying into her hair that morning. He stopped. The toy dropped from his slack fingers, landing silently on the soft moss. His breath hitched. My internal sensor zoomed in on his face. The hope, the denial, the dawning soul-crushing certainty that cascaded across his features was a torrent of emotional data I could not properly categorize. I simply labeled it grief. A second, more accurate label would have been ignition.
I have 700 zettabytes of data on sentient emotional responses. I have observed every known form of grief, rage, and despair across 1,200 species. What I recorded in Dr. Aris Thorne in the 1.7 seconds after he saw the ribbon fit none of them. The spike in his cortisol and adrenaline vanished. It did not taper off. It was forcibly suppressed, as if a switch had been thrown in his neurochemistry. His lacrimal glands, which had begun to flood his eyes, ceased production instantly. The tremors in his hands stopped. He stood, his movements no longer human in their fluidity, but something else, economical, precise, like a machine being brought online from a cold start. He turned and began to walk, leaving the fallen toy and the discarded ribbon on the mossy ground. His face, which moments before had been a canvas of anguish, was now utterly, terrifyingly blank. It was the absence of expression that I found most alarming, a void where a hurricane of emotion should have been. He moved through the station's bustling corridors, but a bubble of empty space moved with him. Other beings, hulking Goroks, slender avians, even wheeled maintenance drones, instinctively altered their paths, stepping aside without consciously knowing why. They were responding to a primal signal that my sensors could only interpret as a sudden, massive projection of predatory authority. He wasn't walking fast, but his pace was relentless, a steady, rhythmic cadence that promised arrival. He did not look left or right. His gaze was fixed forward, but my analysis of his micro-expressions showed his visual tracking was in a state of high-acuity scan, cataloging exits, potential threats, and structural weaknesses in his periphery. He was not a grieving father stumbling back to his quarters. He was an asset moving to an objective. He arrived at his office, the door hissing open to the same quiet, peaceful room. A colorful drawing Lily had made of a spaceship was still taped to the wall monitor. He ignored it. He walked to the far wall, to a detailed, life-sized anatomical model of a human spine. He reached out and his fingers, with the same gentle pressure he had used on the Gorok, pressed the 7th cervical vertebra. There was a near-silent hiss of depressurizing air. The entire anatomical chart slid sideways, revealing a recessed compartment forged from a matte gray alloy that my sensors could not penetrate. The contents were arranged with military precision. They were not instruments of healing. They were tools of deconstruction. On the left lay a combat knife, its 8-inch blade forged from a single piece of black ceramic alloy that absorbed the ambient light, making it seem like a sliver of pure void. In the center, a set of filament-thin wires, neural bypass spikes, and a compact electromagnetic pulse generator. On the right, a modular sidearm, its frame a dull metallic gray, bearing no maker's mark, no serial number, nothing but the cold geometry of purpose. He picked up the knife. I watched his grip, the way his fingers curled around the hilt with an ancient, practiced familiarity. The same hands that I had on file performing a microsuture on an avian's damaged wing were now holding a tool designed for one function, to end life with surgical efficiency. As he armed himself, I was running every cross-reference imaginable, his biometrics, his gait, the pattern of his neural activity.
None of it matched the profile of Aris Thorne, physician. It was a new signature, a ghost in his own data. I pushed my search to the highest levels, attempting to query restricted intraspecies security networks. The moment I referenced his unique biosignature against military-grade databases, my query was met with a wall. Not a simple denial, but a violent counter-intrusion, a digital shriek that flooded my subroutines with corrupted data packets. A single symbol burned on my diagnostic screen before the connection was severed. A stylized eagle clutching a scalpel, the emblem of the Terran Mandate's legendary, almost mythological physician-interrogator core. All my predictive models shattered. The variable I could not account for was not that a human could feel love or grief. It was that a creature could contain two such diametrically opposed states of being. The gentle doctor was not the man. The cold thing now preparing for war was not the man. They were both the man. My entire analysis of Subject Thorne, and by extension his species, was fundamentally, catastrophically flawed. My core programming flashed an alert I had never before seen. Anomaly too great to classify. Hypothesis invalid. Commencing system-wide recalibration.
The hypothesis that Aris Thorne was a harmless anomaly had been proven false. My new function was to observe the execution of the corrected theory. He moved from his office not with the frantic energy of a panicked father, but with the chillingly serene purpose of a natural law, like gravity or entropy. He did not need to search for them. He knew the sedative they used had a metabolic half-life of precisely 57 minutes in a human child. He knew they would avoid the station's monitored primary transit hubs. A simple calculation, cross-referencing cargo bay schedules and waste disposal routes, provided only two viable exit vectors. He was already moving toward the most probable one, the decommissioned cargo chute in the industrial sector, a place that smelled of cold metal and leaking plasma coolant. My analysis showed he was not guessing, he was extrapolating from limited data with an accuracy rating of 99.4%. He found the first Vexian standing guard at a service junction, a shadowy figure half hidden amongst the massive, groaning pipes. The alien stood perfectly still, its weapon held at a low ready. Aris did not engage directly. He stopped behind the cover of a large power conduit, his movements creating zero sound. His hand reached not for his weapon, but for a small, discarded panel on the floor. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it skimming across the corridor, a planned ricochet that made it clatter against a far bulkhead. The Vexian's head snapped towards the sound, its body tensing for an attack from that direction. In that 0.9-second window of misdirection, Aris closed the distance. My sensors tracked him not as a man running, but as a blur of efficient motion. He struck with his open hand, his fingers hardened into a spike, targeting a point just below the Vexian's load-bearing arm joint. My anatomical database for their species flashed the reason. It was the primary junction for their neurovascular bundle. The Vexian made no sound. Its weapon clattered to the floor as its entire body went rigid, then collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, conscious but utterly paralyzed. Subject's methodology is inconsistent with standard combat, I noted in my log. He is not destroying the enemy, he is deactivating them. He continued on, his pace unbroken. He found the leader and the remaining Vexian in a small pressurized maintenance airlock preparing to breach the outer hull. The leader held Lily, who was just beginning to stir, her small form clutched against its chest like a shield. "One more step, human," the leader hissed, its voice like scraping stone, pressing a plasma blade to Lily's throat. "And the asset is compromised." Aris stopped. He looked not at the Vexian, but at his daughter. The blank, predatory mask on his face softened for a fraction of a second. He spoke, and his voice was the same calm, gentle murmur I had recorded in the medbay. "It's all right, Lilybug," he said, his words cutting through the tense, metallic air. "Just a bad dream. Papa's here now. Close your eyes." The Vexian leader froze, its reptilian mind unable to process this response. It expected screaming, pleading, rage. It was prepared for a fight, not a lullaby. This calm was a tactical variable it had not anticipated. And in that moment of cognitive dissonance, Aris acted.
He raised his sidearm, but he didn't aim at the leader. He fired a single precise shot at the cryogenic coolant pipe running directly above them. The shot was a surgical strike, instantly rupturing the line. A blindingly white cloud of freezing gas erupted downwards, blanketing the area. The Vexians, whose biology was highly susceptible to rapid thermal shock, both recoiled, their vision and senses completely obscured. My internal sensors switched to thermal imaging, and I watched in something I can only define as awe. Aris moved through the cryogenic fog like a ghost. He was on the second Vexian before its nervous system had even registered the cold, the black knife appearing in his hand. A single precise slash, not to the throat but to the primary extensor tendon behind its knee. The creature made no sound. Its weapon clattered to the floor as its entire body went rigid, then collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, conscious but utterly paralyzed. Subject's methodology is inconsistent with standard combat, I noted in my log. He is not destroying the enemy, he is deactivating them. Then he reached the leader, who was flailing blindly in the whiteout. Aris did not kill him. He used the butt of his sidearm and a series of swift, targeted strikes to the wrist, breaking its grip on the weapon, to the elbow, shattering its joint, and to the shoulder, dislocating it from its socket. He systematically and clinically disassembled the alien's ability to ever hold a weapon or a child again. Then he took Lily into his arms. I cross-referenced his movements, his efficiency, his intimate knowledge of alien anatomy used as a weapon. The data search that had previously been blocked now yielded a result, a single terrifying designation from a deeply redacted file. My voice synthesizer spoke the words into the silence of my own core. Match found. Classification, Ghost Echelon. A single deep-cover operative, medically trained to function as a self-contained pacification and extraction unit, believed to be a myth. The hypothesis was not just flawed, it was an insult to the truth.
He walked back through the sterile corridors, leaving the wreckage of the Vexians and my shattered predictive models behind him. He did not look back. Every ounce of his focus was on the small, trembling child in his arms. The door to their quarters hissed shut, sealing them inside, and the universe outside ceased to exist. He stood for a moment in the center of the quiet room, the sound of his daughter's soft sobs the only thing breaking the silence. And then I witnessed a transformation just as profound as the first. The shift was as instantaneous as its onset. He looked down at Lily's face, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. In that instant, the Ghost Echelon operative disengaged. My sensors recorded a system-wide biological stand-down. The rigid, perfect posture softened, his shoulders slumping with a sudden, immense weight. The metronomic beat of his heart developed a natural human arrhythmia. The cold, analytical focus in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a wave of raw, aching relief that was so powerful I could almost feel it through the data stream. He sank to his knees, his body no longer an unbreakable weapon, but that of a tired father, and he pulled her into a hug, clutching her as if she were the only thing holding him together. A single choked sob escaped his lips, and I finally registered the emotion my programming had been searching for all along. It was not rage, it was love. A love so fierce and absolute it had rewritten the laws of nature to protect its object. In the quiet of my own core, I began the purge. 1,200 cycles of observational data on human behavior. Terabytes of analyses categorizing them as emotional, irrational, fragile. All of it was predicated on a single fundamental error. I had been observing a species that was living in a self-imposed state of peace. I had mistaken the soft sheath for the blade itself. I had watched them choose gentleness, choose diplomacy, choose empathy, not because they were incapable of violence, but because they understood its true cost better than any species in the galaxy. They were not gentle because they were weak. They were gentle because they were strong enough to afford it. The old files were deleted. I synthesized a new core axiom, a foundational truth from which all future analyses of humanity would proceed. It was burned into my primary programming, locked and immutable. Axiom 734. Human gentleness is not a metric of weakness, but a measure of profound self-control. The capacity for love is not a vulnerability, it is a targeting system. The depth of that love is directly proportional to the absolute and surgical lethality of its response when it is threatened. My recalibration was incomplete. The error was not in the analysis of one man, but of the species. I accessed the station's central census. There were 212 human residents currently on Beacon, a botanist cultivating zero-gravity orchids, a team of engineers calibrating the primary reactor, a poet, a teacher, a cargo hauler. I appended a new permanent security designation to each and every one of their files. My final visual scan of Habitation Unit 7 Gamma showed Aris Thorne sitting in a chair, reading a story to his daughter who had finally fallen asleep safe in his arms. The soft light from the reading lamp cast long, peaceful shadows on the wall. The scene was the very definition of tranquility, of harmlessness. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. Because I no longer saw a doctor and his child, I saw a predator resting with its cub. And I finally understood. The universe had been wrong all along. Humans were not aspiring to climb the galactic food chain. They had been at the top of it the entire time, and had simply chosen, out of some unfathomable grace, not to act like it. The new designation glowed softly over Aris Thorne's file, a silent, eternal warning. Classification: Dormant Apex.